Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of August of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the southwestern part of Ukraine. We discussed the situation in this area during the previous video, but during the day we got additional details about what exactly was happening there. First I would like to talk with you about massive missile and drone strike. Once again, the Russians during the previous 24 hours, as a result of missile and drone strikes, managed to destroy IRIS-T air defense system in the vicinity of the city of Odessa. Most likely after the Ukrainian air defense system was suppressed, the Russians launched another wave of missiles and drones, and this time the Russians were attacking the city of Izmail. And as a result of the second wave of attack, the Russians destroyed very big ammo and fuel depot. So during the night, the Ukrainians were trying to probably stabilize the situation, but here in this video we can see the consequences of Russian attack. Obviously something big was destroyed. And as for the morning of the 20th of August of 2025, that was everything we got. But later the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation gave us additional details about the previous 24 hours in the area of the city of Odessa. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians attempted some special operation with use of a significant number of boats. The Ukrainians started from the city of Odessa, and the Ukrainians were heading towards the Crimea, but the Ukrainians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, were stopped at a distance of 72 kilometers from the coast of Crimea, so somewhere here. Furthermore, later the Russian resources, several pro-Russian resources, shared this video, and here we can see how the special forces of the armed force of the Russian Federation, Rubicon, managed to discover the approach of Ukrainian boats, and then they attacked them with Lancet drones. So we have just one episode, but the sources are saying that Ukrainians were using up to 10 boats with lots of drones on board. So the question is what the Ukrainians were planning to do. The Ukrainians didn't plan to land infantry on the territory of Crimea. The Ukrainians didn't plan just to go around Crimea and to return back. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, were planning to shorten the distance as much as possible, and then, let's say, from this position to attack, let's say, deep inside of the Crimea Peninsula, with the purpose to destroy as many as possible military facilities and military objects with FPV drones, and when they are empty, to return back to the territory of Odessa. So that was the plan, but the Russians managed to discover the plan and to stop Ukrainians somewhere in 72 kilometers from the coast of the Crimean Peninsula. So the question is, what exactly the Ukrainians were planning to do and how Ukrainians are planning to do this. Very interesting detail that today several pro-Ukrainian resources published this video, and here we can see what exactly the Ukrainians were planning to do. For example, in this very moment we can see how Ukrainian boat was swimming towards Crimea, towards the Kinburn Spit. So this is the moment. Once again, this is the Black Sea. This is more precisely Dnieper estuary, and here we can see Ukrainian drone, not FPV drone, but Ukrainian boat was heading towards Kinburn Spit. And when the boat shortened the distance as much as possible, then Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the Kinburn Spit with a significant number of FPV drones. The Ukrainians haven't managed to do significant damage to the Russians in this area. It was just an exercise, military exercise, something like this. Ukrainians shared with us this video with the purpose to show how exactly the Ukrainians were planning to attack the Crimea. So this is the situation, but once again the Russians managed to stop those 10 boats and not to allow the Ukrainians to destroy military facilities along the shore, along the coast of Crimea. Most likely the Russians have a lot of air defense system here, lots of let's say airfields, military facilities, warehouse and ammo depots, and if Ukrainians could attack all these facilities, most likely they would be able to deal significant damage to the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians are not attacking the Zaporizhia direction from the south. The Russians prefer to advance and prefer to attack the Zaporizhia direction from the east, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours once again managed to improve their position significantly. First, let's talk about the Gulay-Polye direction. The Russians during the previous 24 hours took under control several tree lines and fortifications to the east of the settlements of Poltavka and Okhotniche. These territories were taken according to the deep state, according to pro-Ukraine resource, and several hours later we got another report. This time the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the settlement of Novogeorgievka was taken by the Russians completely. And few minutes after, the Russian sources of the group of forces east published this video, where we can see how exactly the Russians were taking the village under complete control. So as usually, at first the Russians were bombing the settlement with artillery and aviation, then the Russians sent their drones to secure the territory, and only in the final part of this assault operation the Russians launched troopers. And in this very moment we can see two Russian soldiers that raised a Russian flag in the most northern part of the settlement. Based on this video and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the territory of the village of Novogeorgievka to the east until the villages of Shevchenko and Volne Polye under complete Russian control. So we see that the Russians are advancing, and now it's clear that Russians are going to move further in the western direction with the purpose to dig between the settlements of Pokrovsk and Gulay-Polye, to cut this territory in two, and then most likely to begin assault and offensive operation in the direction of Gulay-Polye from the north and from the northeast. If the Russians are able to advance further deep inside of the Zaporizhia region this way, this will lead to complete collapse of the entire Ukrainian defense. Most likely at the end of this possible Russian offensive operation, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the settlement of Gulay-Polye further in the western direction. As for now, the Russians are still too far from this position. They are still moving in the central part of this area, but we see that the Russians are moving almost every single day, almost every single week. We have adjustments. From 1 till 3 villages per week the Russians can take in this direction, and they're doing like this. As for the next target, we see that the Russians move their focus further in the western direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received several videos of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine between the villages of Berezova, Ternova, and the settlement of Zaporizhia. So most likely these 3 villages is the primary target of the armored force of the Russian Federation for the next stage of the Zaporizhia offensive. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that there are still and there are currently very heavy clashes for the settlement of Nova Vasilievka and Nova Aselka. Since the beginning of August, we have received lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing this territory. We believe that in coming days, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, probably the group of forces East, will announce additional village which fall in Russian hands. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. The situation is very difficult in this area. When talking about the city of Pokrovsk itself, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular activities. The Russians are advancing along the railways, trying to get to enter the city of Pokrovsk from the southeast. The Ukrainians from their side are trying to counterattack the southwestern direction with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back further in the direction of the village of Zverova. So nothing special. But when talking about the northeastern part, the area of recent Russian breakthrough, something interesting is happening today. Both pro-Russian and pro-Ukraine resources in the same voice reported that the Russians repelled Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that started several days ago. The Russians finished regrouping, and now the Russians are taking the initiative back in their hands. The sources are saying that the Russians began their own counter-offensive, and now the Russians are taking the territories back that they lost during the Ukrainian counter-offensive. So it seems that Ukrainians in in coming days would be forced to fall back further in the north and the northwestern directions, and the Russians will regain their lost positions. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation also made very interesting report. Today the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the village of Sukhetska was completely secured by the Russians. This village was colored in Russian favor a long time ago. Today we just added this report to map. As for the villages of Vladimirovka, Shakhova, and this area along the river of Kazennyi Torets, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions as well. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the village of Pankovka was taken by the Russians completely. Based on the report of the Minister of Defense and based on the geolocation, based on the video that was published by a pro-Ukrainian source, we adjusted this territory completely in Russian favor. Here we can see two Russian soldiers that were under attack of Ukrainian drones, and these episodes took place exactly in this area. So the village of Pankovka was taken. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the next village in this area along this line, along the river of Kazennyi Torets. We are talking about the village of Vladimirovka. Very important village. These villages are very important for the Russians. The village of Vladimirovka, the village of Shakhova, and the villages of Toretsk and Sofievka. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, then, telling the truth, I'm not sure that Ukrainians would be able to slow down the Russians and to slow down the Russian breakthrough further deeper in the direction of the border between Donetsk region and the regions of Kharkiv and the Dnipro. So this is the situation in this area. So we are waiting once again additional updates and additional videos. Most likely tomorrow we're gonna get additional changes on the ground in Russian favor, further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, around the villages of Rubezhny, Zolotoy Kolodez and Veselye. Because today once again several neutral mappers reported that Russians re-entered the village of Rubezhny and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. So this is the situation on this direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the city of Constantinople. The Russians continue their offensive, and today we got several very interesting articles published by pro-Russian resources. According to them, as a result of clashes, the first sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation entered the southeastern part of the city of Constantinople, and during the day we got lots of changes on the ground that were published by several pro-Russian resources. But later the same pro-Russian resources reported that after the Russians entered the city of Constantinople from the southeast, the Russians withdrew their positions back towards the settlement of Pritiechna. So during the day, the Russians carry out something like reconnaissance and combat operation, and when they discovered that most likely they are able to begin offensive, they return back their positions in the area of Pritiechna. Now the Russians are regrouping, and maybe this upcoming night between the 20th and the 21st of August, the Russians will make another attempt to attack, but this time with the purpose to dig in deeper. And this is going to be the exact beginning of the Battle of Constantinople. At the same time, the Russians are fighting with Ukrainians around the settlement of Alexandra Shultina. Pro-Ukrainian resources published lots of videos of how they were trying to stop the Russians with FPV drone attacks, lots of wounded soldiers, but the Russians are moving despite losses, despite difficulties. Most likely the village of Alexandra Shultina will be taken by Russians in coming days. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Seversk Liman direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. First of all, the Russians continue bombing the settlement of Seversk and villages around. Mainly the Russians are concentrating on FPV drone operators, teams, crews, on different equipment, the communication. There are still lots of job to do. The Russians are moving and getting closer and closer. As for the Seversk direction, currently the main concentration and the main task for the Russians is to secure the Serebryanka forest, and we see that the Russians are about to finish this task. If Ukrainians lose Serebryanka forest, they will lose strategical position and they will be forced to cross the river of Seversk Donetsk and to begin retreating further in the western direction. And we got a very interesting video from the settlement of Zarechny. In this video we can see how Ukrainian tank of 63rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine was counter-attacking Russian positions in the southern part of the settlement. We can see Ukrainian tank was fighting Russian position within a very short distance. This video confirms that the Russians controlled this part of the settlement. Most likely, we added these, let's say, changes to the map softly. Most likely, the Russians, by the end of the 20th of August of 2025, were controlling more than 30 or even 40% of the settlement. It seems that the battle for Zarechna is about to be finished. The Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main evacuation road, the road Zarechna-Liman 0528. As you can see in this video, Ukrainians were trying to run away or to escape the city of Zarechna, but they were attacked by Russian drone and destroyed. So this is the situation. The battle for Zarechna is coming to the logical end. As for the Kupinsk direction, nothing special during the previous 24 hours. Another important thing is that today several pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians are about to finish their concentration of their forces in the vicinity of the city of Kharkiv. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians are planning another adventure by the 26th of August of 2025. The Russians, according to information we have, are ready for this adventure from Ukrainian side, and this is going to be also a part of the global and major general battle that is taking place right now. It is important, very important for Ukrainians to succeed during this possible adventure, because if the Ukrainians are defeated during this possible offensive operation before negotiation process between Putin and Zelensky, then most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from many territories and to sacrifice with many territories to stabilize the situation. So let's wait and see. This week is going to be very, very interesting. And that's it for today. Military of a Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.